Alejandra. We have the same name, so somos tocayas. I was just asked to remind everybody that there is translation, so for those of you who need it, I believe there's probably some headsets or... Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Alejandra Valles, and I am the Secretary-Treasurer and the Chief of Staff for SEIU-United Service Workers West. And I'm also from El Paso, Texas. Has anybody ever heard of El Paso, Texas? Or I feel the love, I feel the love. Usually I say that and people are like, and so I grew up the daughter of a garment worker that worked for Lee Jeans. If any of you are wearing Lee Jeans, I'm gonna look at them and I'm gonna ask you to take them off. I do not like Lee Jeans, but my mother was a garment worker, my dad was a construction worker, and they were undocumented for most of my childhood. And I grew up in El Paso, which is also the frontera to Ciudad Juarez. So it was just an everyday thing where you would drive across and you can literally see, here's the Rio Grande. You could wave at people on the other side. You can see the little houses. But every other day or so, you could also see a body that was covered in a white sheet. Of all of the women que eran desaparecidas, who had disappeared. When VF Jeans and all the garment companies closed in El Paso because of NAFTA and they went across to Juarez, that brought with it a lot of violence against women. And that was just something that was, my mom would put her hand on my sister and our eyes and just say, turn around. And it was just something like, okay, just, it happens. But look the other way. There's not much that we can do about it. So when I was sexually assaulted by a stalker I never knew, who somehow made his way to my home one day after doing house visits, and I got home at 11 p.m., and he assaulted me in my own home, I ran out, fought for my life, and ran out to the middle of the street until somebody was able to come help me. And they took me down to the police station. And in Spanish, they asked me si tenía papeles. And so in English, that's if I was documented. And I have to tell you that I am a US citizen. I don't have any children. I am a union activist, organizer. I'm not afraid to lose my job. And so my privilege never stared back at me more than it did that day. And I want to tell you a story today. About an amazing documentary that came out in 2015 called Rape on the Night Shift. Have any of you seen it? And a group of 18 women, janitors, who got together, screened the documentary, then decided to go out on a fast on the front steps of the Capitol in Sacramento, and won groundbreaking legislation that mandated an in-person training for the entire industry, in the janitorial industry, union and not. And I can sit here and tell you, if they did it, anybody can do it. Y tan tan. And we lived happily ever after. But that's not the story I'm going to tell you today. I'm going to tell you the unedited story about how freaking hard it was to do this work. And how hard it's been to lift this up and confront this issue head on as a woman of color. And it wasn't just me. I have Sandra Diaz, who is, I'm so proud to announce, is going to be the executive director of the Ya Basta Center, the first Ya Basta Center in SEIU-USWW. So I want you to give me a round of applause for her. She's been doing this work for 14 years at our union. And I'll talk a little bit more about the partnership and what it took. And obviously, none of this would have been possible without workers, their courage and their expertise. Like Veronica Lagunas, who I'm going to talk a little bit more about in just a second. So I just want to make sure that we lift up Veronica as well, rank and file janitor and promotora. So when I started in the union when I was 21. I'm 41 now, so that's been 21 years. And I also would love to tell you that every time that I experienced sexual harassment or I saw it happen, that I stood up and said, ya basta, enough is enough, that's unsolicited and unwanted. But that would not be true. And one of the things that just reminds me to when my mom used to close my eyes and say, look away, was that you almost became numb to it. You got used to that this is just the way things roll. This is just the culture. And so in our union at USWW, and mind you, I've worked for SEIU for all those 21 years, so that's been my experience, and briefly with the AFL-CIO. But in our union, in our local, there was a culture that I quickly learned when I started there, that it was called the firme culture. And that was this thing called, it translates into firm culture, and that could mean a lot of different things. It has a cultural meaning, but it also has, it could have a sexual meaning as well. And the initiation, once, there had been some kind of assessment somehow that you were down, then you would get invited to this bar that I can't go to anymore, but the bar had a 2-for-1 special that they called the booby special, because you got 2 drinks for 1. And that just seemed wrong, and it felt really uncomfortable. And we, in our union, said we were going through a leadership change. And we said, how are we going to lead differently? But many of us had been taught the 9 steps of organizing. Has anybody ever heard of the 9 steps of organizing? Any of the union folks? So it was this there's a part of it that's an issues piece, that's about organize and find solidarity and common ground around the things that workers have in common, which is usually wages and benefits and some working conditions, right? And so we say, oh, right, respect and dignity, which obviously this is one of those issues, but sometimes this issue can be seen as divisive. And so usually that's what you do. You build solidarity around what you have in common or what the majority has in common. But some of the work that we had started doing at the local was, how do we actually lift up difference and celebrate difference? How is the person that's not impacted by racism, do they understand what it means to walk in this world as a Black worker, or as a woman of color, or as an immigrant, or as a member of the LGBTQI community? And that if we wanted to win, and this is before Trump got elected, this is before the Me Too movement, but that if we wanted to actually win, we needed to take on building solidarity around our differences, not just what we had in common. Because if we didn't, the employer was going to use those differences to divide us, which ultimately is what we're seeing now at a much larger level than just one employer. And so we started doing this work. And one of the first things that we did was we met with an organizational equity and inclusion coach. And he put the women in one side of the room, and he put the men on another side of the room, and he said, how does the world see women? And when they're trying to insult you, what do they say about you? And all of these different things came up on this little flip chart in the middle. And then they asked the men the same thing. And at the end of the day, many stories started coming up from all of the women in the room. Rank and file women who had become staff at the union, and many other women, and who said, this is what I've lived through, and this is what I've experienced here in my own local. And being told, it turned out that the one thing everybody had in common is that somehow these women, because they were in leadership positions, had done something to sleep their way to the top, or had somehow used that, and so that was seen as a negative thing. So any women who came into leadership, it was like, what did you do? Immediately. And so we were angry, and the men in the room had an aha moment. And we continued to do this work. And then we started doing it with our executive board. And we were in a room almost as big as this, and somebody, we were doing a tracking exercise. Has anybody ever done a tracking exercise? Or the step up, step back, something like that? Okay. So this is just no judgment, you just observe. And so somebody says, I'm a woman, and then all the women stand up without saying anything and just look around. And you notice and you track, are they a subordinated group or are they a dominant part of the group in this setting? And so, one of the men had said, oh, I'm a Dodgers fan. So it's all giggly, it's all fun and games. Yeah, and so all the Dodgers fans stand up and it's nice and light. And then somebody said, I'm a survivor of sexual assault and rape. And almost every woman except for one stood up. And it was just this moment that the facilitator said, we just have to stick with this. And so I share that with you in that one part of a value that we have when doing this work is that we can't help others if we don't help ourselves. If I myself am a survivor and I don't deal with my trauma and what I've gone through, how can I help somebody else? And that applies not just for myself, but for the organization. For the organization. And that was hard because we had to confront it. So we had actually been doing this work for 3 years before 2015. So when Rape on the Night Shift, the documentary, PBS documentary came out, the women in the local said, enough is enough, ya basta. We had reached our tipping point. And we also had built enough solidarity with each other that we said, we're gonna take this on full on. And I remember it was actually Fernando Tapia who forwarded the first link of the documentary as soon as it came out and said, hey, have you all watched it? And I think he was working with you all by then, but he had worked at our local. And then there was this panic, and we get this email, I'm not gonna say where it came from, do not screen the documentary, do not share it. And we were like, we are a janitors union, justice for janitors. Because one of our employers, union employers, was featured in it. And what was that gonna do to that relationship? And we were angry. And we said, how dare we call ourselves the janitors union and be about working conditions if we're not gonna take this on? And so we sent out the link and we said, watch this to all of our staff and to all of our officers, and we're tracking it to see who actually watched it or not, and not a lot of people watched it, not a lot of men watched it. And so, but we just decided we're gonna do this, we're gonna confront it, and we're not gonna let up. And so that started the journey along with our executive board, with our members. And our members said, we're gonna screen it up and down the state. And from there, we're just gonna have conversations. But we can't just have irresponsible conversations. Because what we learned was that it was important to be trauma informed. That if somebody comes to you and says, I was raped, it was different than saying, hey, I didn't get my vacation pay. And that how you responded as a union representative or as an officer or as a coworker mattered. Because if you said to that person, well, what were you wearing? Or how late did you stay after your shift was over? That could put that person in decades of silence versus reporting and getting help. So we realized we had to change the culture. And so we embarked, and I'm not gonna talk a lot about what we've done with the work to go really deep with our members, to tackle sexual harassment at every level, from the employer to the supervisor, to staff, to even union organizers and representatives, but within colleagues. I'm gonna let Veronica, who is here with us, talk about that tomorrow when she's in her workshop. But what I do wanna tell you is that that was also incredibly challenging. A lot of our own union did not wanna say rape or sexual violence. It's health and safety. When we put billboards up around California saying end rape on the night shift, the biggest fight with those companies was the word rape. Can't you use end health and safety violations on the night shift? But I share that with you because many of those aha moments, our own president says, I had a really hard time just naming it. Just saying, it's sexual violence. In the workplace, it's rape, it's assault. It's not all harassment. Right now, everyone's just calling it harassment, but it's harassment, assault, stalking, and rape. And so there was just countless challenges every single day where we just had to stay strong, put on the warrior, game and go in it. And we didn't let up. When the employers in the union contract, because we said we can't just deal with this in the union contract, but we're also going to have to deal with it at the industry level, because we represent 20,000 janitors. There's over 125,000 janitors in the state of California. So how do we partner, or how do we force our employers to come to the table and do what we need them to do and be models on this, the same way that they have on wages and benefits in our contracts? So when we did this in the contract, on the last day of bargaining, when wages were still outstanding and the issue of sexual harassment and sexual violence was still outstanding, our employers came to the table. Now this is when you're fighting for that last 5 cents, 10 cents, right? The last day of bargaining. And they said, this is how much, with a dollar figure of millions, it would save us in legal costs if the union gives up the right to private action. The right for, it'll just be arbitration. So, and our president, because we had done the work with our member leaders, and because there were women like Veronica at the table, and myself, said, is that the price of a woman's body? Is that the price of being raped on the night shift and being assaulted? No, over our dead bodies. And we rejected it. But had it not been real, had this work not been authentic, there probably would have been a lot of bargaining committees that would have accepted that right then and there. And when it comes to this issue, every woman, every single person has the right to choose their own path of justice. Whether that's reporting, whether that's going to mental health, whether that's being active in your union, whether that's saying ya basta out loud with a bunch of women sitting down and doing civil disobedience in the streets. All of this can be healing, but we get to decide. And so I share this with you with a lot of love and respect for the challenges and real conversations that we have had to go through internally to be able to do this work. Because if we hadn't done that, it would not have ended up in a groundbreaking legislation or groundbreaking work that is opening up the path to continue to do this work and really integrate it in the daily lives of and fabric of the union. And so janitors did take a stand. They did screen the documentary. They didn't just screen it up and down with janitors, but with all kinds of community members and women and partners and allies. They did take to the streets. They did get arrested. They did say, I am immigrant, and I am more scared now to report than I was several years ago. And the reporting has actually gone down for immigrant women during this time, even within the Me Too movement of immigrant women, because they are so scared to get deported and separated from their families. And they did win groundbreaking legislation, which was an in-person training. That's important because we needed to make sure that women like Veronica get in front of other women like herself to say, talk to me, I am trauma-informed, and here are your rights. This is the difference between rape, sexual assault, harassment, and stalking in the workplace. A woman, one janitor, as part of our promotoras, had been sexually assaulted with her own broomstick. And she didn't know that that was illegal, because in her mind, that was not the traditional intercourse in how she defined sexual assault or rape. And so we realized that it was women themselves who had the answers of why they weren't reporting and what the culture was like in the janitorial industry. And so the work that we've done with LOHP, with Alejandra Valles, with the state of California has been, how do we put women front and center, worker-centered solutions? And a lot of people are saying that right now, but that doesn't mean putting them up front 30 minutes before a presentation saying, here, read this. Here's the pre-flip charted training. It means talking to them and letting them figure out letting them be the architects of their own training. What do you need? What do you not know? What would you wish your supervisors to know in this moment? And doing that hard work of drawing that out and helping work together to make it come to life, which is what I'm happy to announce has happened with our partnership with LOHP and with the work of Alejandra Valles. And I think that that's the lesson. There's a couple of lessons that I would leave you with in terms of our story. And it would be, one, if you're working and you have the privilege of working with women like this or other groups of workers anywhere, don't make the mistake of coddling. So many times people have come up to them and been like, oh, pobrecitas, and we're going to bring you over here and please tell your story of how you were raped or assaulted. But then we'll have the experts from all these academic institutions that are going to talk about all of this. No, we need to be very conscious of that. I would also say, and that kind of goes along with the tokenism, right? It's like they are the experts of their industry. I don't know what it's like to be a janitor. I don't do that every single day. I don't know what it's like to take the trash out at the end of the shift. They do. They know when they're alone. They know what it's like to be in that bathroom on your knees, scrubbing those toilets, but they also know how to change that culture if we figure out how to really bring that to surface and have the world look past their biases and actually see the expertise that these workers have. I would also say, and I'm gonna, that we have to take this moment past liability and compliance and look at culture change. If all we're doing is checking the boxes, we did the training, then we're not changing the everyday culture of whatever industry that we're working on or that we're trying to change. And the last thing is confront it. Don't be afraid to do the hard work every day of waking up and saying, we're going to take this on internally, but as a person. I'm going to look at myself. And if I have been part of that problem, I'm going to change it. And if you need help, then get that help. Or if the organization or your unit needs that help, then figure out how you're going to help introduce that and find allies to be able to stand behind that and say, and in front of it to take that on. And the other thing is that I shared with you my story about being from El Paso and being a survivor. Don't be afraid to bring yourself fully into it, 100% yourself. Many of you have probably experienced or know somebody who's been assaulted, raped, sexually molested as a child, have your own stories. And you decide what that journey is like, but don't be afraid to bring yourself fully in. Sometimes it's like, oh, I'm staffing this. And you kind of put that on the back shelf. But with this work, it's going to come up. You're going to go back to that moment of driving in the car with your eyes being closed, or that moment being sexually assaulted. And that is why it is important to have some trauma-informed tools so that you know, I'm recognizing this trauma. I see the trauma happening, and I'm going to talk to this person after the training. And that we also know how to respond. So with that, if you have any questions for me, I'd invite you. I'm going to stick around. But I am so proud of the work that our members have done, the women immigrant janitors that have stood up and who have said, ya basta, enough is enough, and who are continuing this journey of not needing to be saved, but saving themselves. And Veronica Lagunas is going to be working with Sandra Diaz. She's the co-founder of the Ya Basta Center at SEIU-USWW. When she first got involved, she said, Alejandra, I didn't want to be a janitor when I was growing up. When I was in El Salvador, I didn't grow up thinking, one day I'm going to be a janitor in the United States. My life has forced me into this path. But I am here, and I have so much of me that I can give, and that I know about how we could change things in this industry, and I am so much more than a woman who cleans who cleans bathrooms and the skyscrapers of many of the richest corporations in this country. And so I want to introduce to you with all the honor and of being able to work along Veronica as a promotora. She is now a certified rape crisis hotline operator. She's also a certified HIV AIDS prevention specialist in California. She's a certified self-defense instructor, and she is and continues to be a janitor on the night shift.